Hello everyone, this is Ponder on Weather. In this update, we've got deep tropical moisture building in the Caribbean with a huge flooding concern coming up for Jamaica and the Cayman Islands by the middle of next week. And that low pressure will be near the Gulf of Mexico by next weekend. Welcome back everyone. How's it going out there? This is your Thursday afternoon update. Man, we got a lot to talk about in this update. So if you are new to the channel and you like detailed weather breakdowns on the US and the tropics, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's take a look at the overall satellite picture this morning. First, in the US, we've got several systems coming across this flare up of storms up here in Montana. That's traversing across off the northwest flow. Then we have this other area of activity too that will be pinwheeling across here into portions of the northeast. Will set the stage for severe thunderstorms going into the day tomorrow with some big large hailmakers and some damaging winds. So definitely be on high alert for those storms impacting those areas tomorrow. We finally have that broad surface low winding itself down. It dumped a lot of flooding rains in its wake over the last couple of days into Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi. They had all the flooding rains yesterday. But now we're going to be taking our attention out here in the tropics because they're starting to get a little bit more active now. So we're starting to see this little flare-up of activity right now here into the Lesser Antilles. That's the system I'm really mainly concerned about as this will continue across into the Caribbean, and I think will eventually be a very heavy rainmaker for the island of Jamaica and especially the Cayman Islands heading into the middle of next week, and that will eventually get near the Gulf of Mexico by next weekend. So let's take a look at the setup here. First of all, we talked about it yesterday on my yesterday report about a lot of dry air. Why has it been so quiet? It's been the quietest since 1982. It's basically because first you had a lot of Saharan dust in the atmosphere. Now you had a lot of dry air. Well, you've had a lot of dry air, but there are subtle signs of it trying to sneak in with a little bit more deep tropical moisture overcoming some of that drier air. So we have that system out here into the Lesser Antilles right now with these flare up of activity. You can see it right here. This yellow shaded area, that is your dry air, right? But you see this little moist air mass right here. That's actually kind of eating away at this drier air. And this is expected to traverse across really south of there. So I really feel this is going to be this, at least this wave is going to be able to hold together and get out here into the Western Caribbean, and I think that's when it's going to be really taking advantage of the environment there and really start to develop into a really could be prolific rainmaker for the island of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands by the middle of next week. So I'm definitely very concerned, especially if you live out there. I know I've got some followers out there in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. I'm talking to you guys. This thing looks to be coming up and developing and to produce a very intense rainmaker. So let's set the stage for you and how all this is going to be developing. So right now, the National Hurricane Center has two areas concern, right? We have a 20% chance of this one really coming off the coast of Africa right now. But the main one right here that we're highlighting by the Lesser Antilles, it's essentially a well-defined tropical wave. It's moving across the Windward Islands while producing kind of a disorganized shower activity and thunderstorm activity. And environmental conditions are slowly going to be starting to develop, but it's not going to be a wind threat for, I feel like, the Western Caribbean. It's going to be a very heavy rain threat as a lot of the conditions are really kind of coming together, having all this deep tropical moisture dumping onto those islands. So overall, here's the setup. Now, this is kind of concerning, especially for the United States, because this look, and this is an evolving pattern. So this is not this week, this is going into next week, right? So we've got this ridge that's going to be developing over the top, and we've been talking about this for a while, that once this setup comes into play, then that's going to allow some of these areas down here in the Caribbean and the Gulf to kind of lower some of these lowering pressures. This is typically a quote unquote an ideal type setup for producing tropical activity, tropical type storm, hurricane type storm. and landfalling type storm for the United States. This is a fairly similar type setup to Hurricane Harvey. Now, granted, this is the anniversary of Hurricane Harvey. By no means I'm talking about the same impacts of Harvey, right? But this is what you would see in this setup right here. If you're going to have a landfalling producing hurricane, this is typically a similar type setup of what some of these storms have landed in the past. And here was the setup that when Harvey hit, you had the ridge up here into the Pacific Northwest, you had the ridge over the top, you had lowering pressures underneath, and then you had some instability coming across with this trough into the Northeast, as well as down here into Texas, back into the Southeast here. So this is a kind of a similar setup of what we're going to be seeing into next week. So again, by no means I'm talking about a Harvey type system, but this is just, putting the pieces of the puzzle together right now, showing kind of similarities of the overall pattern, going forward into next week. So now let's take a look at the shear, right? So now we're looking at all different parameters and how all this is going to evolve over time. So all these areas in green here, that is your most favorable area, right? So we've got the little tropical wave, out here into the open waters of the Lesser Antilles. That's going to be traversing across, heading into that little bit more favorable type of environment, right? So once it gets past that drier air, it's got a somewhat favorable environment once it gets into the Western Caribbean, because as far as the shear aspect ratios, there's not much shear to contend with, and especially as you get into the Caribbean and then heading into portions of the Gulf of Mexico, there's a lot of shear once you head into Texas and into Louisiana, at least currently right now. So now let's take a look at the temperatures, right? So we've only had 3 named storms. It's been very quiet, the quietest, since 1982. So we're heading into peak season, the peak date, September 10th. So it's like not unusual to be talking about a storm potentially heading into next week at the first week of September. This is what you would typically probably see for a hurricane season. This is usually what happens in September and October. You typically get some named storms out there. So it's definitely not out of the question. We could be looking at a tropical type entity heading into next week. So it's got a lot of deep sea surface temperatures to contend with, right? This has been untapped waters, right? We haven't had a tropical system in a long time. So these systems are prime and ready, and all it has to have is some trigger to make it happen. And so one aspect are the sea surface temperatures. These are in Celsius. Right here, about 30 Celsius. You only need about 27. So this is plenty warm. 30 Celsius, about 86 degrees. Some of these areas are 88, even along the coast here. You're talking 90 degrees, if not low 90s. So it's plenty of warm. But there's also way down to the ocean, deep tropical moisture. So not only do you have low shear, you've got high sea surface temperatures at the surface, but once you go down, right? Once you get down, half mile into the open in the ocean there, it's got the most intense heat anywhere in the Atlantic basin is right here along the island of Jamaica, going into the Cayman Islands, getting into the western parts of the Caribbean here. This is why I'm really concerned. Once that little wave gets out here in this region, man, it's going to be really taking advantage of this fuel, not just at the surface, but at the deep ocean level. That is going to be sending potentially copious amounts of rain and dumping it over that island. So I'm very concerned about flash flooding and then mudslides and landslides for that area. You got plenty of time to prepare. We've got, probably next week. I'm really more concerned about Wednesday and Thursday next week, the last day of August, the first day of September. It'll be near that island and potentially the most heaviest rainfall by then. But it's not a perfect type scenario. We got a lot of sinking air to contend with. So it's not like prime conditions. We do have some tough roads to overcome, as we're looking at the overall velocity index. coming off the coast of Africa, it's pretty prime condition. So I'm expecting these waves to develop fairly close, especially that second wave that's coming off. I'm definitely expecting that one to develop into a named storm fairly quickly once it comes off, right? But once it hits this environment, it's definitely got a tough road to handle, right? We start to see hints of green here. This is where it's heading into portions of the Atlantic into the Caribbean. But overall, it doesn't have much vertical lift. So there's definitely ideal scenarios, but there's also a scenario where, hey, it's going to be having a tough road with some sinking air to overcome in its wake. So let me take you through the overall setup here. So by the time we get into this weekend, we'll be talking about this little broad surface low that had all the flooding rains. Finally, we can actually say goodbye to that system as it more or less just fizzles out, right? So here's the activity that's coming off the African coast, where we got plenty of time to watch this, right? But I do feel it's going to be pretty, quickly forming into a possible named storm pretty quickly once it gets off the coast of Africa here. But the main concern more inland here is this little wave down here in the Lesser Antilles that's going to be traversing across into the Western Caribbean by the time we get into this weekend. So how it's going to work is we've got a high pressure center over the top, right? So we've got this huge high pressure center come by this weekend, really building over the top. That's going to keep these waves that come off the coast of Africa to continue westbound, right? But you can see the pressures here, they start to lower, right? So as this ridge starts to develop over the top, it'll have these lowering the pressures underneath, and that will help intensify this little tropical wave, over time. So I'm not expecting it to be a named storm by the time it gets into the islands here and into the Caymans, but it's going to be a very big time rain producer for them. So that is definitely my main concern. So if we take a look at the precipitable water index going on Monday, right? So as that wave continues to verse across, little by little, you're still getting some heavier rain start sneaking into the island of Jamaica, heading into the Cayman Islands. We'll also have another system coming through here into the United States that's going to be sending potentially another kind of heavier rainmaker. We've got another trough that's going to be coming in, and that's going to be sending some heavier rains, not tropical from this feature. That's going to be a separate feature for the United States. But yeah, over time, that's Monday. Here's into Tuesday. So we're going to be looking at a compounding effect with daily rain showers heading over those islands, compounding, wetting all the soils, moistening all the soils. And I do feel by the time we get into your Wednesday time frame, more intense rainfall. By the time we get into the end of the month, the 31st of the month, more intense rainfall. We're looking at 2 to 3 inch per hour rainfall rates in this area, taking advantage of all the sea surface temperatures, the deep ocean water content in that area, the less shear environment. It's going to be sending some very heavy rain with huge impacts by then, potentially a flash flooding setup, potentially mudslides, as well as landslides in those areas. And even the GFS is way more bullish with very intense rainfall over the area. So ideally, you're looking at Wednesday and Thursday are my main concern. If you're listening to me from the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in the Cayman Islands, those are the 2 days that you really need to be on high alert, heading into next week, with this very could be prolific rainmaker for your area, sending huge concerns of flash flooding. So here's the wind aspect. Like I mentioned, I'm not expecting terribly too much winds out of this deal. It's going to be a tough road trying to form in some tropical type entity in the next 5 to 6 days, but we still could be looking at some 40 upwards to possibly 50 mile per hour wind gust in and around near that area by the time we get into Wednesday and Thursday of next week. But overall, I mean, look at the intense rainfall you could be looking at of 4 to 5 times normal than average, or what you would typically see this time of year for the next 7 days. A lot of this will be compounding starting this weekend, heading into next week, Monday, Tuesday, and then your bullseye days are your Wednesday and Thursday for next week. So overall compounding, we're looking at a lot, a lot of rain. I mean, where you're looking at 4 to 5 times potentially above average, 400% to 500% above average rainfall. It's very concerning that we're looking at this intense rainfall in those areas. So, but beyond that, of course, we got a lot more uncertainty. We have to look at the ensemble members when we don't have a low pressure, tropical entity forming. It's got a 20% chance to form in the next, 5 days. Of course, the individual operational GFS model has been playing pinball with this system, heading into Florida, heading into the Southeast, heading into Texas, heading into Mexico. It's going to do that on these operational runs because there's no low-level center, right? So you always have to look at the ensemble members, this far out when there's no basically low-level center. So beyond that, as it shows here, I'm not expecting a storm by the time it gets into Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, but once it gets past there, we do have more members of the European guidance trying to come together once it gets into portions of the Yucatan and getting into the Gulf of Mexico, but this won't be until next weekend. So if you live in the United States, we got plenty of time to watch this system and how it all evolves once we get a little bit closer. And the GFS guidance kind of implies the same way. I mean, essentially from Mexico to Texas to Louisiana to Mississippi to Alabama to Georgia to Florida. I mean, it's all over the place, and you're going to be seeing that spread because it's way out here into the Lesser Antilles right now. So, but the main concern in the next 5 days, going into the middle of next week, are these islands right here that's sending very heavy rainmaker for those islands. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this channel. Definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Catch the latest update where I protect you before and after the storm.